Good morning, everybody. And today, Mr. Chairman, as you know, is truly an historic day for the victims of human rights abuse in Ethiopia, and for all of those who believe that Ethiopians deserve better than the cruelty and the repression that the Meles regime has imposed upon them. I want to express my deepest congratulations to you, Mr. Chairman, for bringing to the floor later on today, staunchest international supporter of the Ethiopian government of Prime Minister Meles. Our government supplies Meles with over $100 million in aid every year, much of it military. We cannot do this and pretend we don't share responsibility for the human rights abuses perpetrated by the Meles regime. We cannot do this and criticize China for supporting the barbarous Sudanese regime of Bashir. We all know that the Ogaden region of Ethiopia and in Somalia is extremely complicated, yet the moral imperative is not complicated at all. A good end cannot be justified by a bad means. While we want to deny jihadist terrorists any platform, the Ethiopian Democracy and Accountability Act, which I believe will be approved by the House of Representatives and will send a clear, unmistakable message to the Meles government that we know what you're doing there, and we profoundly disapprove, and we believe that the people of Ethiopia, like I said, deserve better than that kind of repression. Mr. Chairman, as you know, in the Ogaden region, the Ethiopian government is fighting an insurgency but has carried the war to the innocent population. The Ethiopian government has put the region under effective commercial blockade, prevented humanitarian assistance from reaching the suffering people, and expelled humanitarian non-governmental organizations. We have reports that troops have also raped women, burned villages, and confiscated livestock on a large scale. In Somalia, we have reports that the Ethiopian army has raped and pillaged. Of course, brutality is not limited to the Ethiopian army. It is rampant in the Ogaden and Somalia, where insurgents, warring clans, and terrorists all intentionally inflict misery upon the land. The UN High Commissioner for Refugees has reported that nearly 500,000 people, almost one-third of Mogadishu's population, has fled in recent months as conditions in the city have deteriorated. But the U.S. government remains this form in the Horn of Africa. We must not protect ourselves and our allies from terrorists by enabling the Ethiopian government to visit terror on the Ogaden region or Somalia. We can only work with the Meles government if we do everything possible to change its behavior. This means we have to be willing to do more than dialogue with President Meles. We have to be willing to withdraw aid if this government does not dramatically improve its human rights record. That is why I strongly support the Ethiopian legislation that is on the floor today, H.R. 2003, which I do believe will pass overwhelmingly in a bipartisan fashion. This bill will withdraw certain forms of aid to the Ethiopian government, including forms of military aid, if it does not meet certain human rights benchmarks spelled out in the legislation. The reports from Ogaden and Somalia are the latest in a long series of human rights outrages, as you know, Mr. Chairman. In August of 2005, I visited Ethiopia and met with some of the opposition figures imprisoned by Prime Minister Meles. I also met with Meles himself. I brought up the June 2005 slaughter of almost 200 pro-democracy demonstrators in Addis and the mass arrest that followed. I urged him to investigate that atrocity, to punish those responsible, and to release political prisoners. In a very cavalier attitude, Meles told me, I have a file on all of them. They are all guilty of treason. So much for any presumption of innocence, so much for any even semblance of due process of law. We should all be skeptical of the value of a dialogue on human rights reform with a man who would make that kind of comment. I believe that our government has not pushed President Meles hard enough on human rights issues because it is satisfied that his government is cooperating with us on the war on terror. The war on terror is important. But no regime that terrorizes its people can be a reliable ally in that war. Terrorism isn't just a military issue. It's also a human rights issue. Terrorists often come from countries where governments fail to respect their human rights. In promoting human rights in Ethiopia, we are attacking terrorism at its roots. Finally, Americans' commitment to promote respect for human rights around the world demands that we insist that Prime Minister Meles respect fundamental human rights. I again, like you and members of this committee, call upon our government to withdraw forms of aid and support to the Meles government to release its remaining political prisoners, disperse civilians in its counterinsurgency operations, and to permit humanitarian aid in the Ogaden region. Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.